G'day, g'day. Hope you guys all having a good one. And I just thought I'd spend a bit of time today talking about the new path tracing update in Cyberpunk. Um, so first things first, I've seen a bit of controversy in terms of, what even is the point of path tracing? Why are they even adding it? Does it even look better? Why even use ray tracing? Some, ray tracing doesn't look any better. Um, and I think ultimately the answer to the main questions that are coming out at the moment would really be dependent on you and also just in general. Like basically, I'll start from the start. Um, to put to give you an idea on what uh ray tracing, path tracing, and I guess rasterized lighting and stuff is, here's a pretty good example of what it actually is. So rasterized is predetermined lighting. Correct me if I'm wrong, but from my knowledge, it is predetermined lighting, which is generally baked and has already been decided on where it is. Um, so back when I was making games, I still am, if you guys have been keeping up, but it was you would generally bake your lighting. You may ask why bake your lighting? What even is baking? Baking is effectively taking all the information because if you're going to have lighting, you would have to simulate it. But simulating it is hard on your computer, so you would bake, and baking is effectively taking a simulation and then compressing it and effectively turning it into either a file or a group of files which hold that information. So baking it will mean that instead of you having to simulate this lighting and whatnot on the fly, it would effectively just be on a disk, so it would take up more storage, but it would run a lot better. So baking is generally what a lot of these games would be doing, and just having predetermined lighting as well. Um, it's just quicker and faster to run, but it is also up to the devs to work out the lighting and fine tune it. So you've got some games that could have pretty average lighting and pretty average reflections and whatnot. This is just dependent on how good the company and devs are behind the games and stuff like that. So that isn't to say that rasterization is bad. It's generally better for games in the sense of it runs a lot faster. Now that's simply because ray traced and path tracing, especially with path tracing being new, it's a lot harder to run. Now, none of this is new. Now, a lot of people look at it and say ray tracing, oh, that's some fancy new feature that came with the RTX 20 series cards. And that is blatantly just not true. Same with path tracing. You can say, oh, path tracing, some new feature that they're trying to push on these RTX 40 series cards. And that is simply also not true. Now, ray tracing and path tracing has been on, been around for a long time. Throwing a random number out of my head, but at least maybe let's say around 20 years, give or take. Maybe a bit less than that, but around there, I would say. So it's definitely not some new feature, but what is new about it is the fact that it's being implemented into games. And you may wonder, oh, well, why is this all becoming a thing now? Well, putting two and two together, it's not easy to run. And it was more of just a hardware issue, and still is a hardware issue as to why ray tracing and especially path tracing is not it's quite a new feature. So we are now getting to the stage where we are capable of running ray traced to a pretty good standard, and now even path trace is getting included into these sorts of things. And you just got to take a step back and go, what? So ray trace, I'll run you through them. Ray trace is simulated lighting, but it's simulated via, correct me if I'm wrong, one beam of light. So in real life, you have a light source and it will shoot many beams of light, right? And this is what causes reflections. It causes shadows and differences in shadows, such as like your penumbra, your terminator, and all this, stuff. All these parts of the shadow is like, you're gonna have different parts. Otherwise, if it's just like blah, it's probably just gonna be simple standard flat lighting, right? But you got multiple different forms. You've got light reflecting off of things. That's your ambient occlusion, which is your light reflecting off of stuff like that. And so that's what ray tracing is. Path tracing is more than one light beam effectively going down. So you'll generally get much better lighting, much more realistic lighting with path tracing. But on the other hand, because it's just inherently more, it's going to be a lot harder to run, and is simply why you're going to be seeing lots of people going, oh, why is it so hard? Okay, so to put it into simple plain terms, and give you an example, I've done a render just before here. Here's a simple basic scene that I've built up. Now, it's super simple, super basic. It took me about 2 minutes to make. I just added some colors to give you an example. And as you can see here, we've got nice red reflection of the sphere over here. Bounce, and that's like the light bouncing onto it. Same with the green reflection here and yellow going here. You can see, if we look close, you can see the colors mixing over here, barely though. And you can see all this happening here. Now, this is in here. This is a path trace render. I'm using Arnold for this. I still have this scene actually open right here. And this is with a bunch of lights and everything. And that's how you get the best looking quality in terms of renders. So when you look at watching like films and high quality renders and whatnot, stuff like that, that will generally be done in path traced render engines, such as Arnold or Cycles with Blender. Then you've got a different render engine. Now, I'll just quickly pause it while I bring it up. Sorry about that. I forgot to grab the image out. This is an example of ray trace lighting. So obviously it's a lot more built out scene, and I haven't done a test effectively for ray tracing to show you guys an example, but here is ray trace. It's just, single beam. The pro to ray tracing is it's a lot faster, but your lighting and quality is going to be a lot worse. So this is done in Marmoset, right? Marmoset Toolbag 4 for anybody who is overly interested, which is a ray trace renderer. You can use other things such as Adobe Sampler, I think it is. And the pro to these is they render a lot faster, but will have a lot less quality in terms of rendering. So everything's going to be slightly worse in terms of the render, but it's going to be a lot faster, which is good for people who just want to pump out a render of the object and their main focus is the object and not making some fancy scene with lots of reflections and, fancy lighting. So, to put it in perspective, this took me about that's way too much. It took me about 2 seconds to render, 2 or 3. That's really fast, right? Now, if you want to know how long it took me to render, for example, it's gone. The last thing that I showed, my test that I did with path tracing here, you can probably see here, 14 minutes, and to put it exact, 14 minutes and 20 seconds. So, what we can tell from this, now I did bump up the settings obviously for this a little bit. This is a 2K by 2K. I can't remember the rest of the settings. I just played around with them a little bit. But to put it simple, this taking 2 seconds and this taking 14 minutes, that means that this significantly takes longer. Why would you use it? Because it's going to give you much more realistic results, but it takes a lot longer. Now, to relate this back to Cyberpunk, if path tracing is taking that much longer to render, it's going to be a lot harder to run real time in a game. That's why you're not going to be getting crazy numbers of FPS. Um, and so it's not just a case of lazy devs or needs optimization. It's not the fact that it's not optimized, it's just the fact that that's how the technology works. Now, we've got other path trace games such as Portal 2, obviously Path Trace Edition, and you've got, I think Quake, some Quake has path tracing as well, and they also do not run amazingly, but that's simply because it's path traced. It's at the moment mostly just to show off the technology of being able to run it real time. Don't expect to be going and playing these games with path trace lighting as an enjoyable 300 FPS experience. No, that's not the whole point of them releasing it. I'm pretty sure they specify it being a technology preview. So when they specify it's a technology preview, they are previewing that they are capable and that your computer is capable of running path trace lighting. Now, it's up to you to decide whether you think it is worth or not worth using. To put it simply, this is the difference. This is rasterized. It's predetermined lighting, as I stated. I'll move this slightly to the side so you can see. Whereas this is overdrive. You've got much more, like, the lighting is causing a lot of bloom. You know, the shadows are looking a lot better because it's, middle, your sun causes warm lighting, warm being like your temperature maybe being, I think the lower is warmer, so it'd probably be something around, maybe I'd guess around 5,000 here. Whereas here you can't, it gets a bit hard to get that sort of lighting going, hence why it's reflecting here nice and warm, and it's just overall a lot better, more realistic lighting. And here is some pictures, shout out to Sith Lord ZX for taking some of these pictures. But here are some examples of path trace lighting. As you can see, it's got like really crazy lighting. So what we can take from this is it does look significantly better, even compared to ray tracing. And some will say that they can't see much with ray tracing. I'm sure you can see a lot more with path tracing, as it is just effectively ray tracing, but going like ham. So it's pretty crazy. But is that going to make the game more enjoyable for you? I think for me, at least, I would probably run path tracing, maybe a little bit. I don't know if I will consistently run. I only have a 4080, so I don't know. They did recommend to have a like 4090 or in the future higher card, but I've got a 4080. I think it can run it relatively fine, but we'll have to see how it goes. But yeah, I think it's very awesome, and I can personally know the differences, and I can spot the differences probably better than generalized person, as I work with 3D models and lots of rendering, so I sort of know what I'm looking for when these sorts of things. Which is good for me, but for the generalized person, there'll be some people that do notice the difference, some that are like, what's the difference? I guess it is ultimately dependent on your knowledge of ray tracing and knowing to look out for what is actually being different, like indifference. But yeah, I think ultimately it's a really awesome update. There's not many games with it, and I think it is pretty damn cool. I guess last little tangent I'll go on before I end this little recording would be, why is Nvidia claiming all this ray tracing stuff? That is because Nvidia has a decent focus on ray tracing and I guess path tracing. If I, in the background, open up Blender, for example, just as my example. I'll give you a quick run through of something. So yeah, that I think key thing to note here is that AMD can run ray tracing. Ray tracing has not, will not, and just won't ever be a NVIDIA exclusive thing. But it will be significantly better performance wise and just in general on an NVIDIA card. And you may think, oh, but it's NVIDIA fans, NVIDIA. Oh, look at me. I overprice all my stuff because I'm on NVIDIA. That's sort of the case, but not really. Ultimately, NVIDIA focuses on more than just games. AMD pretty much explicitly only focuses on games. This means that they're very good just base GPUs, but for anything reaching outside of, games, it's kind of falls behind quite heavily. For example, some of the top GPUs that AMD makes are quite a bit slower at rendering in comparison to NVIDIA cards. Even some of the older NVIDIA cards are faster than a lot of the newer ones that are coming from AMD. That's simply because of the technology that NVIDIA is putting into their cards. NVIDIA does not focus just on games. They focus on games and workstation stuff, right? AMD solely, in terms of GPUs, pretty much solely focuses on games. This is why they are a lot cheaper, because they have different focuses, okay? So AMD is solely focusing on gaming market, Nvidia is focusing on gaming market and rendering market, 3D market, Adobe and stuff like that. So ultimately you have different ways of rendering on these cards. And what I was bringing up Blender to explain, if I think it's in system, we've got these rendering devices. Now, this is dependent on your card, but you've got none, which would just be using no technology to boost your renders. Then you've got CUDA. CUDA is supported by the 16, 10, and under series, right? This is anything that isn't an RTX card, right? Made by NVIDIA. Now, CUDA is inherently better than AMD in general. They focus a lot on this sort of stuff, and this is why they've made it quite performant and just capable compared to a lot of AMD cards, which is why even the older cards would probably still potentially, in terms of the performance you'll be getting out of this, would probably technically still be better. Now, that's not to say that when you're trying to ray trace in a game, some of the AMD cards will be slower than like a 10 series card. No, that's not what I'm trying to say. But in terms of capability at what they're trying to do, you're going to be getting technically a bit more out of the CUDA. In the sense of if you use a CUDA card and, for example, HIP, you're going to be getting a bit more performance out of CUDA. And I'll run through what HIP is. You've got OptiX. OptiX is what RTX cards have. It's this fancy new feature that allows you to render a heap faster. I can actually bring up a graph after this, but this is very fast, and this is why all these RTX cards are so fast, and why they're trying to focus on ray tracing and whatnot. That's simply because they're putting a lot of time and effort into making all this render a lot faster and putting these specified RT cores, ray tracing cores, to solely focus on rendering this ray trace lighting and whatnot. Then you've got HIP. HIP is AMD's version of this. It's quite a bit slower. They don't really focus on it as much. Does it work? Yes, it's better than not using any of these sorts of things, but it's not great. And lastly, we've got one API, which is Intel's architecture. So ultimately speaking, I mean, NVIDIA's got two that they go by. Obviously, as I stated, OptiX is a lot faster, but this is simply why NVIDIA's focusing is like claiming, not necessarily claiming, but they're pushing ray tracing a lot more than AMD sort of related stuff, simply because they're putting more time and effort into ray tracing, so it's going to be getting, they want to show off the fact that they're putting a lot of this time and effort into it. That is I think the best summary I could do. I'll quickly bring something up. I'll be back in a second. Sorry for taking so long. I did also forget to mention Metal. I don't know if it's been fully supported by Blender yet. They were mentioning it, but there is Metal, which is Mac. That's all the Apple stuff. Bear in mind, this is not just a Blender exclusive thing. This is also on Maya. This is in any render engine. This is also appliant in games as well. So I'm not going too much off topic here. But here's an example. I'll just move it to the side so you guys can see a little bit better. These are different sample scenes, so it's kind of take this with a grain of salt, because you would have to see, well, you don't, it doesn't really make a difference on what these are, but these are just default scenes that have been used. And now this is an RTX 2080 Ti, and then there's just a CPU, which is an Intel Xeon Gold 6126. And this is just to show off the difference between rendering and why this is quite important. So obviously, as you can see, blue is the CPU, less is better, and this is just showing off why running all this on your GPU is kind of a necessity and how much of a difference it actually makes. So why this is also putting in perspective that having good architecture on your card is quite important. As well. I mean, you will inherently have better performance on your GPU, but also having good architecture is quite important. And as we can see here, it's the same card. You're not going to be getting any more performance base, right? Like, the card's not suddenly growing bigger and like, ooh, we can do more. But as you can see, in some things like Pavilion Barcelona, there is a more significant difference. In general, there is always a better performance on OptiX. This is effectively showing off that OptiX, albeit it is dependent on the scene and what you're trying to render, while in all cases it is better to use OptiX, but the difference can change a little. And I think ultimately what to take from this is just that OptiX is a form of rendering, I guess, with the card's architecture, and it improves performance and speed within renders, and this is also appliant in games and stuff like that. So ultimately, you're getting better performance while not having to have a better card or any better components, and that's why ultimately this does make a difference, and is why Nvidia is simply better, because I did try to search up one with all this and I haven't been able to find good examples. A lot of these are really weird. Anyway, ultimately speaking, to just end what I'm trying to say here, last thing I would just say is just it's still in the process of just being fully developed into running performantly well, and ultimately it just needs a bit more time in the cooker. It's pretty cool to see now, but don't expect all these games to run perfectly like this. It's amazing that you can run a game like Cyberpunk like this capable with all this path tracing and whatnot, and I guess the last thing I want to say is nice work, CD Projekt Red. You've done a really good job at adding this into the game, and I can't wait to try it out myself. Hope you guys have a better understanding of, the difference between rasterization, ray tracing and path tracing, and why it is actually quite crazy that they are able to run path tracing real time, and on top of that, dependent on if using frame gen or not and stuff like that, to how playable it really is, and why having Nvidia cards is not really just flexing money and that you're all just, oh, I love Nvidia, and that there is a genuine reason to why you should use why you should get ray tracing cards. I'm not saying to get ray tracing, it is dependent on the person and the use cases, but why there is actual performance difference. So yeah, hope you guys, that was interesting, and I more just want to throw this out, as I'm probably not going to edit it much, but yeah, hope this was interesting. Thanks for watching. See y'all.